Hey, small business leaders. Have you ever thought there's got to be an easier way to do all this busy work? With JustWorks all-in-one platform, you can check all the boxes, run payroll in 90 seconds, access premium benefits, take care of tax reports, and even hire internationally through JustWorks EOR. Any questions? Reach out to expert staff for real human support. Plus, transparent pricing guaranteed. Visit justworks.com/podcast to join the thousands of small businesses that trust JustWorks to take care of payroll, benefits, compliance, and more.
Welcome to Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop. Coming up, we'll review the week's top stories about the state's $53.1 billion spending plan being signed into law and the outcome of a case challenging a hastily enacted mid-cycle election law. I'll then join the Center Square's Dan McCaleb to further discuss those stories and more. That's ahead with Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop.
Knowledge is power, and you deserve to know what happens in your state government. That's why the Center Square's reporting zeroes in on state authorities publishing stories that show where your money goes and who spends it. The Center Square gives power to the taxpayer by tracking politicians' use of the people's money and demanding transparency from state-run agencies. This is how the Center Square equips you, the American taxpayer, to hold your state government accountable. Sign up now for your state Center Square newsletter at thecentersquare.com.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop. Here's some of the top stories from the past week. Illinois taxpayers will be on the hook for more than $53.1 billion in spending after Governor J.B. Pritzker signed the largest spending plan in state history. The budget spends 32% more than when Pritzker first took office. It wasn't just Republicans that wanted cuts. Some Democrats, like Illinois Comptroller Susana Mendoza and State Representative Fred Crespo, sought to reduce spending. Crespo suggested a hiring freeze, across-the-board reductions, and building agency reserves.
And we came up with $1 billion, and my understanding was that wasn't considered either.
Wednesday, Pritzker said they could have brought their ideas directly to his office. As for concerns about the future year spending pressures,
you heard that in 2022. You heard that in 2023. You're hearing it in 2024. People say it every year, and you know what we've done? Balance the budget every single year.
Just in Pritzker's first term, Illinois taxpayers paid at least $5.2 billion of increased taxes, according to the Illinois Policy Institute. The new budget starting July 1st increases taxes another $750 million, including another increase in gas taxes. A Sangamon County Circuit Court judge made a temporary injunction permanent, finding that enforcing a recently signed law enacting the prohibition of slating for General Assembly races in the 2024 election is unconstitutional. Katrina Peterson has more.
Leslie Collazo, who is seeking to get on the November ballot for a Chicago State House district, said she's not buying that the recently enacted law that eliminates the slating process for candidates who didn't run in the primary is all about ethics.
So although they may say that this was done in the spirit of ethics, the timing of it speaks louder than that.
Collazo's attorney from the Liberty Justice Center, Jeffrey Schwab, explained at least now in future elections, candidates are aware they have to run in the primary in order to gain general election ballot access. Schwab explained that the ruling applies to plaintiffs and should apply to other slated candidates for state house seats because the judge deemed the action of denying the plaintiffs ballot access mid-election cycle was unconstitutional.
You certainly can't do it in the middle of this election once candidates have relied on it.
I'm Katrina Peterson.
Those are the top stories from the past week from Illinois. Find more online at thecentersquare.com. Coming up for Illinois in Focus, I'll join the Center Square's Dan McCaleb to further discuss the news. This is Illinois in Focus, a production of America's Talking Network. I'm Greg Bishop.
Are you tired of news that puts politics over people? At the nonprofit Franklin News Foundation, we believe in putting people over politics by delivering nonpartisan news and audio content that serves you, the American taxpayer. With Franklin News Foundation, you can read fact-based, state-focused news for free at thecentersquare.com. You can listen to civil, balanced conversations between policy experts through our podcast network at americastalking.com. Or you can get in-depth news on K-12 education spending, curriculum, and school safety at chalkboardnews.com. It's all free through Franklin, where we put you, the American taxpayer, first in every story, episode, and conversation. And it's only possible through our supporters. Together, we can produce content that puts people over politics and brings Americans the news they deserve. Become a supporter today at franklinnews.org/donate. Once again, that's franklinnews.org/donate.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus, powered by the Center Square. I'm Dan McCaleb, Chief Content Officer at Franklin News Foundation, publisher of the Center Square Newswire service. We are recording this on Thursday, June 6th. A Sangamon County judge handed a big win to potential candidates seeking access to the ballot in November's elections when the judge made permanent what previously was a temporary injunction blocking a new state law from going into effect. Joining me today to discuss this is Greg Bishop, the Center Square's Illinois Associate Editor. Greg, update us on this law and this court action and what it means going forward.
So going forward, it means that the law is unconstitutional unless there's some kind of appeals that are going to be made. But the Illinois State Board of Elections, which was one of the defendants in this case, said they took no position and they don't plan on appealing. But the judge was clear that the prohibition on slating of candidates it could happen in future election years, just not in the middle of this election cycle. So that seems to be the big takeaway from the Sangamon County Circuit Court judge issuing that ruling on Wednesday after they heard the case on Monday. Now, some background on this, Dan, for people wondering what it is to be a slated candidate. So Illinois has the private party primaries for Republicans and Democrats. Taxpayers foot the bill to hold elections, and this year it was in March. And before even the primary, they have a playbook of sorts for elections so that everybody knows the rules. And those rules are put out well in advance of the primary, and they play out for the entire election year. It spells out how to get on a primary ballot, but it also spells out, and this is a policy that Illinois has had in place for decades, the slating of candidates. So if there is not a candidate for a particular party, Republican or Democrat, in the March primary, then the party can slate a candidate for the November election. So essentially, you can be on the November election ballot for the Republicans or Democrats without having to run in the primary. Regardless of your take on this particular policy, whether you like it or you don't like it, the law that they enacted hastily last month prohibited that for this election year for state house seats. So, Dan, we reported before the primary in March just how uncompetitive Illinois seats were for the General Assembly. In more than half of available state house seats in the March primary, the party was already determined. And in a lot of those races, a Democrat did not have a Democrat opponent or a Republican didn't have a Republican opponent. So you've got this ongoing question of competitiveness within Illinois elections. And whenever they ultimately gutted and replaced a bill to prohibit the slating of candidates in this election year mid-election, that had the people who were looking to be slated saying they felt cheated. They felt like the rug had been pulled underneath of them. They felt that they had been robbed of an opportunity to run in the November election. One particular candidate who is actually a chief plaintiff in this case that was decided this week on summary judgment was Leslie Colasso. She is hoping to take on State Representative LaShawn Ford in a Chicago House race. And she said that when she realized that there was no Republican on the March primary ballot in her district, it was too late for her to say, okay, well, I want to run. So she found out about this slating opportunity and wanted to take advantage of that to give voters in that jurisdiction some choice. But then when the governor signed this law, she said she felt cheated. So ultimately, they took it to court, and they said that it was a violation of voting rights and individuals' ability to get on the ballot. And the Sangamon County judge sided with the plaintiffs in this with a preliminary injunction that was issued last month. But then on Wednesday, after hearing the case on Monday, the judge said it's unconstitutional as applied in the 2024 election. So are we going to end slating for the next election and the next term? That seems very likely. But for this election, midstream, the judge says you can't change the rules on people and upend the playbook while people are getting petitions together. So Monday was not just the hearing on the case, it was also the deadline for candidates to file slating petitions to get on the November ballot. So there are still an opportunity here to object to those petitions. And that's going to play out. And we've talked with a couple of different Democrats who have individuals looking to be slated as Republicans in the November election. And they say, if the signatures are good, everything's good. But if they're not good, then their petitions will be challenged. Whether they'll be able to use this new state law as the reason for their challenge, they may be able to attempt that, but I think the Illinois State Board of Elections has already made clear they're going to follow any and all court orders.
Yeah, and as you said, the Illinois State Board of Elections is not going to appeal this district judge's decision. So who would that leave as potential appellates? So someone to file an appeal, like the Illinois Attorney General, the candidates who are already on the ballot, who got through their primaries. I mean, I don't know. Any thoughts?
Yeah, so you've got multiple defendants that were part of this. The Illinois Attorney General has not indicated whether they would appeal this, but clearly the case raises questions about yet again another law that Illinois Democrats passed that's been deemed unconstitutional. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, especially with the court order in place, and with just months before the November election. And even before that, you've got the process of getting the ballot certified. So it's not just November 5th. You've got weeks before that it's got to be certified, and all of the wrangling of objections and whether they're going to object to signatures. But again, this law in particular does not look like it's going to be able to be used to object to individuals looking to be slated for that November general election.
Yeah, I don't have the calendar in front of me, but with early voting now, the ballots have to be certified even, further ahead of the November election date. Anyway, Greg, thank you for your insight on that. Let's move on. Governor Pritzker this week signed the most expensive state budget in the history of Illinois. You covered the budget signing. Tell us about it.
It's 32% more in spending than when the governor took office in 2019, spends $53.1 billion in state funds. But those aren't the only taxpayer dollars that are going to be funding Illinois' fiscal year 2025, Dan. When you add in federal tax funds and other state funds, then the plan is $125 billion. So that's how much it costs in the upcoming year to run Illinois. Now, the measure, of course, it funds all kinds of things: education, healthcare, housing, childcare. It gives the $10+ billion to the state's unfunded pensions. It gives a quarter of the budget to K through 12 and higher education. There's all kinds of infrastructure projects that are going out. But the measure also, when you add up all of the various programs for non-citizen migrants, it spends $970 million on non-citizen migrants, from healthcare to housing and legal assistance to even welcoming centers across the state. So that's $970 million when you add all of that up. Obviously, this is a large spending plan, and you had Democrats rally together to make this happen. But there was a lot of questions about where are the cuts. And with the loss of federal COVID-19 tax-paying dollars, then you've got the question of why are we increasing $1 billion instead of finding cuts? And the calls for cuts were actually bipartisan. You had Illinois Comptroller Susana Mendoza indicate that she would have liked to have seen cuts in the budget, but also State Representative Fred Crespo. He said that he actually proposed different types of budgets in the committees, everything from 5% across the board to a hiring freeze to even putting funds in reserve for agencies to then possibly come back and utilize those funds if they need them. He said they were able to find $1 billion in savings. but that was not considered. Governor Pritzker was asked about that after he signed the budget, and he said that those things were never brought to his attention, and he wouldn't necessarily agree with those, even if they were brought up. But the measure also, it includes, the overall package includes $750 million in tax increases. But here's the trick, Dan. The budget and the budget implementation bill have been signed. The tax increase measure has not been signed. So I have yet to check the latest status, but that tax increase provision, looking at $750 million in tax increases on a variety of different industries, that did not get to the governor's desk when he signed the budget earlier this week. So he says the budget's balanced, but without those revenue increases being signed into law, then the budget's not balanced. Now, of course, the budget starts July 1st, so there's still less than a month to get that revenue bill to the governor so he can sign it. But the budget itself, $53.1 billion, based off of $1 billion in tax increases, depending on how you cut it. It pays almost $1 billion in migrant health care and other migrant subsidies. So clearly this was a pretty divisive issue at the State House.
Well, I think it would be shocking, Greg, if Governor Pritzker did not sign the tax increase measures. One thing we know with certainty, we know pretty much with certainty that the governor will sign the tax increase package. But regardless, even if he does shock us and he doesn't, we know gas taxes are going up again. Effective July 1st, because the legislature did not, was it 2019 when the legislature and Governor Pritzker signed into law the doubling of the state's gas tax and then tied it to inflation every year after that.
Every July 1st, your gas tax goes up, pegged to inflation. I believe it's going to go up another almost 2 cents a gallon starting July 1st. But the revenue package, guaranteed it's going to be signed. The governor's indicated that he would approve it. But when you look at overall the taxes that have increased during Pritzker's first term, the Illinois Policy Institute pegs that at least $5.2 billion of increased taxes. But again, starting July 1st, if indeed the governor signs the revenue package, that's going to be an additional $750 million of tax increases. Now, these tax increases, just to touch on this briefly, comes from a variety of ways. One, you've got a couple of $100 million that's going to be generated from a tiered tax increase on sports betting companies. The governor says that's not going to impact the sports bettors, only the companies, and it's a graduated increase. For the more the sports betting company makes, the more they have to pay in tax. But some sports betting companies pushing back, saying it's just going to limit their ability to better serve customers, to give customers different types of incentives, and so on. And even maybe some of the smaller sports books decide to pull out of Illinois. So those are some of the warnings that have been put out there. So that's part of the tax package. Another part of it is for a cap on net operating losses that businesses can take for tax deductions. So that's going to be around $500 million of increased revenue. You've also got the retailers. They're being capped in how much discount they get in their taxes by being the tax collector for sales taxes. When you go to the store, there's not a tax man standing right there collecting the sales tax. It's the retailer that's using their private resources to collect and remit that tax back to state and local governments. So they get a discount for that work. Well, they're going to cap that discount in the state of Illinois. But in exchange for that, it seems the retailers would accept that to a degree if, and this is interesting, what's called an interchange fee. And we might get a little bit into the weeds here, Dan, but an interchange fee is what financial institutions charge retailers. If a customer is using a credit card, then the financial institution charges the retailer a fee per swipe. Well, if there's, in the language of the revenue bill, if the governor doesn't change it, it says that there's a prohibition on that interchange fee. And financial institutions say that that prohibition on the interchange fee for sales taxes and gratuity is unworkable, and it would require a massive overhaul of their financial institution systems when it comes to swiping credit cards. If they don't overhaul that, then it could possibly mean when you go to the grocery store, Dan, and you go to buy some goods at a sneaker store, or you go to get gas, then you're going to possibly have to swipe twice, once for the goods and then another time for the sales tax. So that itself is something that people have raised questions about, including the financial institutions. And they say it gives no benefit to the state. It's really just a benefit for the retailers. So that's another provision of the revenue package that's part of the overall fiscal year 25 spending plan. So a lot still to see how this plays out in the weeks ahead as we get ready for fiscal year 25.
So I just want to clarify this, Greg. So I don't know. My wife sends me to the local 7-Eleven or whatever the local corner store is just to get some milk. I go in and I have like a half a gallon of milk. I put my credit card in the machine, pay for the milk itself. Then I take my credit card out and I put it back in to pay the tax, whatever it is, on that milk, 20 cents, 15 cents, something like that.
Well, milk might not be the best example here because the budget does get rid of the 1% grocery tax.
Okay, that's a good point.
Right, so it zeroes out the grocery tax.
I go to the pump to get some gasoline then. How about that?
That's what the financial institutions are warning could be an unintended consequence here is another example. The prohibition on interchange fee says you can't charge an interchange fee on sales taxes or gratuity. So another example, Dan, you take you and your family out to dinner. You've got 10 people with you, and they have a requirement at the restaurant. If it's 8 or more, automatic gratuities added to the check. So how do you work that? Are you going to have to pay for the meal and then have to swipe again for the required gratuity on there for parties of 8 or more? Or say it's just you and your wife going out to eat and you want to give a tip. Well, are you going to have to swipe once for the meal and then swipe again for the tip? It might be interesting to see how much cash people start carrying around if this happens to them going to the store on a regular basis. Would they rather just pay in cash instead of having to be hassled with 2 swipes? Either way, the governor brushed aside concerns. He didn't see that would happen and indicated that once the bill gets to his desk, he would sign it.
Are you predicting a comeback of cash in Illinois?
Well, I think I personally do need to carry around some more cash. Just, I guess it depends on where I'm going to be carrying that cash around.
Personal choice, Greg. Moving on, Illinois House Speaker Emanuel Chris Welsh, his own legislative staff filed suit against him over a battle over unionization of staff. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is really interesting because as a reporter, we see how hard the staff work right at the State House. Legislators, of course, do a lot of work when they're in session, but when they're not, holding committees or whatnot, they're holding a lot of other types of meetings, and staff is always there. And they're there at 3:00 in the morning, 4:00 in the morning, whenever they're going, all throughout the midnight runs at the State House. So staff, they figure they want to have some negotiations. They want to collectively bargain as a union. So the Legislative Staff Association was formed after the state's voters approved a labor rights amendment known as Amendment 1 in 2022. And they tried to meet with the Speaker's office to negotiate salaries and benefits and such and work hours. But the Speaker's staff gave them a runaround, the union says. They claim that they were told that they had to be recognized by the Labor Relations Board, and then they tried to get recognized, but the Labor Relations Board said, their organic law doesn't give them jurisdiction in this regard, so they feel like they've been given the runaround for weeks and months, even after the House passed a bill to address this issue. They were critical of that bill, but regardless, they said it seemed to be an empty promise anyways, because once it got into the Senate, they never brought it up. So instead of waiting around, the Legislative Staff Association sued the Speaker's office. And they say that the Speaker, not their words, but they tend to highlight what could be considered hypocrisy, saying that the Speaker advocated for the Labor Rights Amendment in the Constitution, which gives individuals the right to collectively bargain. And they said that he supported that, but he's not supporting these individuals' right to collectively bargain within the General Assembly. So we'll be watching this case as it plays out, but it's spurred on some interesting conversations within the State House.
I'm sure it'll be interesting to see how that moves forward, Greg, particularly when you're talking about the Speaker of the House, who was in favor of that amendment, right? If I remember correctly from a couple of years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. They advocated it, and Democrats went full court press on it.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So, well, Greg, thank you for joining us today. Listeners can keep up with this story, all the stories we talked about today, and more at thecentersquare.com.
Hey, small business leaders. Have you ever thought there's got to be an easier way to do all this busy work? With JustWorks all-in-one platform, you can check all the boxes, run payroll in 90 seconds, access premium benefits, take care of tax reports, and even hire internationally through JustWorks EOR. Any questions? Reach out to expert staff for real human support. Plus, transparent pricing guaranteed. Visit justworks.com/podcast to join the thousands of small businesses that trust JustWorks to take care of payroll, benefits, compliance, and more.